Good morning and welcome to Be Better at Business TV. I'm Jamie Gorman with Sigma Business Management, and we're here this morning with John Stewart of Vantage Economics. Morning, John. How are you?
Good morning. Good. How are you?
Why don't you start, John, by just telling us a little bit about Vantage Economics, kind of what you do and what your background is a little bit.
Well, I'm an economic consultant, which basically makes me a data guru for businesses.
Okay.
I've been an economist for over 20 years now, had experience with the Department of Labor, but now working mostly with private firms, doing a lot of forecasting with them, a lot of strategy analysis, doing a lot of projections, risk analysis, and the like.
Good, good. And I know you have your blog also at VantageEconomics.com, so
yeah.
That's great. Well, good. Well, this morning, over the last couple of years, there's been a little bit of economic news. I guess you've been a little bit busy with that. And so I wanted to really get started with kind of what's the latest, where are we at? We had this recession, there's a recovery, then kind of not a recovery. And so kind of where are we at now? It's September 2012, a few years removed from the initial boom. And where are we at?
Right.
What's going on?
Well, you actually summarized it pretty well.
Okay.
Where are we at? It doesn't take a rocket scientist to know that we've had a little bit of a lull here. Starting in the first quarter of this year, the economy slowed. It didn't contract. We didn't see a recession.
Okay.
But now we're in the summer and things have basically flatlined. So the focus has been, over the last couple of weeks, how can monetary or fiscal policy help bring us out of this? How can it stimulate the economy?
So, and just, to clarify, a couple terms there. First, the difference between a recession and just a contraction. What makes something a recession versus just, hey, it's just a bad economy or just a contraction?
There are a lot of different definitions to that. The more formal definition is if you have at least 2 consecutive quarters of negative gross domestic product, which is the measure of all the goods and services in the economy.
Right, okay.
So we haven't had that. Last quarter, we saw growth of about 1.7%.
Okay.
Which basically means anything below about 2 to 2.5%, you don't feel great.
Right. Okay.
The average person really doesn't feel that boost, and so for a business, you're basically seeing growth about what you've seen over the last couple of years.
Okay. And then you talked about, of course, monetary policy and fiscal policy. Really, you're talking about taxes, government spending, interest rates, those types of things that kind of make the news big. But those are the kind of things that government can control, I guess, and
that's right.
Try to help the economy.
That's right, and that's what the Federal Reserve is trying to figure out. Of course, yesterday in the news, there was the announcement that they're embarking on QE3, or Quantitative Easing 3, which basically means that they're going to try and pump more money into the system, and they're going to try and keep interest rates low.
Okay.
Now the question is, how effective is that going to be? And even by the Fed's own admission, it's not going to be as stimulative as back in 2008, 2009, because interest rates are already very low.
Right. Okay.
So they're wondering exactly how much of an impact this is going to have. So they're trying to impact longer term interest rates, which can help businesses to some degree.
Yeah.
And it's going to be somewhat helpful, but it's not going to be as helpful as earlier, and it's not going to be as helpful as we would hope fiscal policy could be.
Okay, great. And Alyssa, do we have a question from one of our viewers?
Yes. What do Obama and Romney have planned to help the small and medium-sized business owners?
Well, so there's a question I think on everybody's mind. We have this election coming up, and they say it's about the economy, right?
Yes, they do. Yes, they do.
So, what are some of the things that are in the news that the politicians are talking about right now that are going to have the most impact, or could potentially have the most impact, positive or negative, on economic recovery?
Well, it's a very interesting discussion, right? Because a corollary to that, or on the opposite side of that, is our discussions about the debt.
Okay.
So we want to stimulate the economy, and most of what we've done historically is increase government spending under those conditions.
So increasing government spending, you kind of stick money into the economy.
Exactly.
It gets, people
you
are able
hire-
to hire more,
Right.
but then it also adds to the national debt typically.
That's exactly right,
Okay.
because you're not taxing at the same rate,
Right.
right? You actually drop taxes.
Okay.
So that people, instead of spending on taxes, they're spending to hire people, they're spending on
Okay.
physical capital, all those different things.
Right.
Both candidates have proposals to reduce the corporate tax rate.
Okay.
Interestingly, there's not a significant difference in what that target rate is between the
Okay.
two candidates. But there's going to be an interesting discussion, especially if Romney is elected, as to how far they're going to go with cuts in federal spending.
Right.
There's a big push, especially on the Republican side, that, hey, we're spending too much money, we've
Yeah.
got to cut back. And it'll be interesting to see how that plays out if Romney is elected.
Okay, great. And so that national debt, how does the national debt kind of affect economically? What's the impact? I mean, why not just spend more money? Okay, so we have national debt. I mean, what's the long-term impact of that from an economic perspective?
Well, we did,
Okay.
right? When
Yeah.
back in
Mhm.
2008, there were spending plans that were passed. We increased spending under the Obama administration, and of course that reached record levels.
Right.
Then people began to worry about that, because that means that of course we have more to pay off,
Right.
and interest rates start to rise long term.
Okay.
But what's fascinating about all of this is that our economy and the world economy actually becomes very dependent on federal spending in
Right.
order to stimulate the economy.
Yeah.
So over the last year, federal spending is actually down over 3%.
Okay.
Nationally, overall, the economy grew by just a little bit over 2%.
Right.
Federal hiring, we see every single month, there's been a reduction in federal hiring, which then trickles through state and local hiring
Yeah.
as well.
Yeah.
So we have seen cutbacks over the last year, and that's certainly playing a part in an anemic recovery and
Okay.
probably some of the downturn that we saw in the first quarter of this year.
Okay. Great. Great. So, and the second part of that question, of course, was what does it mean for small and medium businesses? So, with where we're at in the economy, what should our small and medium business viewers be looking at, and then, how could this affect them long term from an election perspective?
Right. So we'll look at the election here in a second, but initially, it's complex. I help a lot of businesses do this in terms of forecasting sales and costs and the like. I think for your average small business owner, just to keep things simple, you could probably take what you did in the first 9 months of this year and average it what you did in the first 9 months of last year, and that's probably a
Okay.
decent projection of the next 9 months for you. I think that what also business owners of all sizes have to do is to take a look at their risk.
Okay.
And by that I mean, you've got to take a look at not the industry that you compete in, but you have to look at the industry that your clients are competing in.
Okay.
And then even one removed from that, take a look at what
Right.
your clients' clients are competing in. Because ultimately that has a domino effect on you.
And what's a good example of that? So that's, we kind of think that, okay, yeah, our clients, but, what about our clients? Do you have any good examples of kind of an industry where that could, or you've seen that be effective?
Yeah, for example, manufacturing. We look at one of the ways that I help businesses is to look at how they can diversify
Okay.
who they're selling to. I have a client that sells a lot to the aerospace industry,
Right.
which is very volatile
Yep.
and is heavily dependent on defense spending.
Yes.
So now we're trying to figure out how you might be able to diversify
Okay.
some of that risk and start looking at other clients that might be able to buy those products.
Right. So in other words, he's selling to the airlines or the
Exactly.
those manufacturers, and then they're selling to the government. Well, if the government is looking at cutting, that could potentially mean
That's
airline
exactly
cutting.
right.
And so he's got diversification. would
Right.
be my situation.
And they
Okay.
they do copper cabling.
Mhm.
Well, it's not the copper cabling industry that you're so much
Right.
concerned with here. It's what's happening in defense spending, what's happening in aerospace.
Right. And so
Uh,
what they need to look at is copper in a different industry.
That's
So-
exactly right.
Yep.
That's exactly
Okay, good.
right. Yeah.
Great, great. Okay, and so, small, medium businesses kind of have to look at that, and then what about the election as far as going back
Right.
to that question,
Right.
is what are some of the one or two of the key things that they should be paying attention to?
I wish that I were more optimistic about what's happening. I think that, as we discussed before, both candidates have on the table proposals to reduce corporate taxes,
Okay.
which should help, but again, it's kind of marginal.
Right.
They are looking more heavily at what might happen to individual tax rates.
Okay.
There are significant differences there. I think that the biggest issue is going to be, regardless of who is elected, they've got to reach across the political aisle and get some stuff done.
Okay.
They've really got to take a look at how can they be creative on fiscal policy to not only be looking long term, how do we reduce the debt?
Right.
Obviously a key issue. And the only way you do that is to have small and medium-sized business growth. That's the backbone of our economy.
Okay.
Always has and will be during this growth cycle. So that's the key issue, I think, of, again, regardless of if it's Obama or Romney, they've got to reach across the aisle and they've got to work together in order to figure these very complex problems out. Unfortunately, I'm not that optimistic that can happen.
Okay.
So I think that small and medium-sized businesses have to look at that and think, there may be key issues, healthcare,
Right.
Things like that, that might come into play, but overall, it could be more of the same.
Okay. So even regardless, good.
Right.
Good. Well, yeah. Once again, thanks for coming. I love working with John, because one of the things he does is, I work with businesses for planning and marketing and those types of things, and the economy is one factor in that. And so just things like, hey, if we see something in the healthcare industry, but we're over here in the government sector,
Right.
what can we do to maybe create a channel and to create and go into different markets, and how do we change our marketing and our specific advertising and make those daily decisions that kind of fit into that plan that's going to transition you to help you be better at business, and that's what we're all about.
Absolutely.
So we'll see you next week, next Friday morning, 11 a.m. Eastern Time, here on Be Better Business TV.